Hi there, and welcome to the latest episode of Off the Data Provided, an interpersonal communication podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Dr. Marcus C. Shepard. On today's episode, we'll explore a recent CNN article entitled "Some of You Are Bad Friends, and That's Why You're Lonely" by Christian Rogers. We'll also riff a bit on roadblocks specifically towards male friendships and discuss briefly the sensationalism around Laverne Cox's recent reveal that she dated a MAGA, blonde-haired, blue-eyed NYPD male more than 20 years her junior for 3 years. Throughout these explorations, we'll revisit my friendship formula, which includes the concepts of investment, emotional closeness, trust, and support. We will also talk about, or revisit, I should say, the concept of social snacking, also insufficient whiteness, libidinal economy, as well as desire. Usually we haven't asked Dr. Shepard, but I have been doing that in my own personal life the last few weeks ad nauseum, so we'll have a break, but I promise in the next episode we'll hit 2 of those. So with that said, there's a new CNN article dated August 2nd, 2025, entitled "Some of You Are Bad Friends, and That's Why You're Lonely," where the author talks about the desire that everyone wants to have a village. So many people want to have a network that supports and helps them, but how not a lot of people want to invest in having it. And the author, Christian Rogers, highlights some of the issues and tensions that are existing in this current age where more and more people are feeling lonely. So we know to revisit my friendship formula that I coined back in 2018 with my own book on interpersonal communication. It includes these ideas of investment, emotional closeness, trust, and support. So investment is what you put in. It's your time, your feelings, your energies, your thoughts. And usually if we want to get into the economics, the ROI, right, the return on investment, the longer you stick with an investment, usually the higher your ROI. So at the beginning of any friendship, you're probably going to be putting in a lot and maybe not necessarily receiving a lot. Through that investment, though, hopefully you build emotional closeness. So this is through dialogue, self-disclosure, and or shared activities. We do know gendered-wise, oftentimes women build emotional closeness through dialogue and self-disclosure, where men traditionally, and specifically heterosexual men, do it through shared activity. We do have trust, so not betraying your confidence and doing what you say you will do. So if I say I'm going to show up for dinner at 8 o'clock, I show up for dinner at 8 o'clock. And then, of course, support, which is both verbal and nonverbal. So saying kind, nice, caring things to people, but also nonverbal, rubbing somebody's back, giving them a hug, holding their hands, looking deeply into their eyes, nodding, giving these affirming nonverbal signals that I'm sure a lot of us are aware of. So when I think about the friendship formula and the framing that Christian Rogers begins with, talking about how there's an increase in cancellations and no-shows, I'm sure you've maybe experienced that. I know I have. I'm often the planner in a lot of my friend groups, and I'll plan things. People will say they're coming, and then last minute, people will start dropping out, or they won't say anything, and I'll check in because the event has started and won't get a response, or, oh, my bad, I forgot, or I can't make it. Or sometimes they'll shoot a last minute text to say they can't. And so I know, especially when they're newer friends, if you get too many no-shows or no calls, cancellations, you usually stop inviting those people. So I know I had one potential friend here in Philadelphia. I invited him to a lot of things, and he really wouldn't show up unless a specific friend was going to be present. And so it led me to feel as if he wasn't really interested or invested in having a friendship with me. So the invites stopped being sent out from my direction. And of course, I never received invites from his direction. So there was no friendship. The nascent friendship fully dissolved. It never got its legs. And so we know, of course, as adults, we're all busy. But if you want to have that village that's going to show up to support you, you also have to show up and support other people. And another perfect example is this potential friend one time had kind of said something along the lines of, I should host a little birthday celebration for myself and another one of our friends because We all didn't get to celebrate my birthday nor his together, so I planned something. Everyone came but this person. Right? So after experiencing some of that no-show cancellations last minute, as I shared, I just stopped inviting that person. So then we just didn't become friends. And I'm sure this person is enjoying friendships with other people, but we can't be shocked if you continually rebuff invites, you continually don't offer invites to somebody else, that those invites are going to become further and further, or fewer and far between, I should say. So, of course, if there are big last minute issues, I think anyone would understand. But we do know a lot of times people are like, oh, I'm just tired, or I don't really feel like doing this, or maybe I double booked. And to me, especially in this digital age where most of us are glued to our cell phones, it's kind of inexcusable, in my opinion, to be double booked for something because you easily can just put it in your calendar. I know for myself, I put everything in my calendar, whether I'm going to a movie, I've made tentative plans to have dinner or lunch. Maybe it's not a specific time, but I'll block off time in my schedule. So if I am asked, then I can provide that for someone. Oh, no, I have tentative plans. Well, let me follow up with that person to see if that's still going to happen. And if not, then let's make that happen. Perfect example. One of my friends, Nikita, is coming into town and she reached out to me. She wanted to see me and my parents. And she said, hey, these are the dates I'm coming. I want to prioritize you guys. So I'm telling you first. Tell me a date or some times that work for you. Let's nail it in. Within 20 minutes, we were able to nail a time, and now we have plans to see each other. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's not rocket science. There just has to be that level of investment. Clearly that Nikita showed. She sent me a quick text. We figured it out. And an investment on my part, right? I reached out to my parents. I coordinated. We got it together because I care about her. We love each other. We support each other. And even though our friendship is more long distance and we don't see each other as frequently, when we used to see each other almost every day in grad school, shout out to Dr. Hamilton, we still maintain connections whenever I'm in her city or she's in mine, which she's usually in mine more than I'm ever in hers. We make sure that we put the effort to see each other. And if there isn't an ability to see each other, we still let someone know and not last minute. It's not as if she hit me up the day before, hey, I'm going to be in Philly, just FYI. She knew she was coming to Philly. So the moment she had those plans set, she reached out. That's a level, an aspect of care that goes into deep, meaningful friendships. And while she and I don't speak every day or even every month, we kind of exchange on social media more so, we still are maintaining a level of investment that is going to be important for any friendship to exist. And so where I think a lot of people go wrong, as this article highlights, is they're just inconsistent in their level of investment. And so when someone is too inconsistent, it's easier to just remove them off the board. I think of dating, and we think about interpersonal communication, where you're dating someone and they're super inconsistent. You usually just move on to the next suitor because you're hopefully not going to wait around. So she highlights that. She also highlights following through on your yeses, so having that time management skill, making sure. She also highlights the aspect of having a good scheduler, as we all do. One thing that I did find very interesting was sometimes being an absent friend, she mentions, can be associated due to issues such as maybe being incompatible with your current friend's interests or values. And I think this is really important for people to really sit and think about, especially in this day and age, is sometimes, as we've talked about before, we have friends for a reason, a season, and a lifetime. And especially with social media, we tend to hold on to people maybe longer than their expiration date. Not everybody is meant to travel the life roads with you. Some people, they have an exit and it's okay for them to get off. And as I say all the time to people, especially when we talk about friendships and maybe ending friendships, just because a friendship didn't go the distance doesn't, one, mean that it wasn't meaningful. And two, doesn't mean that it wasn't impactful and changed you in a myriad of ways. I know, for instance, I've lost some great friendships over the past 5 years. And some of those, and we'll get to it later on, come into their lack of investment due potentially to the concept and structural issues of desirability. I wasn't a desirable friend for them in certain ways where others were. And so they took precedent, even though I was offering a level of investment, emotional closeness, support, and trust. And so I referenced this, I guess I can tease a little more, as one friend, for instance, totally abandoned me essentially because he had a new partner. And so was very focused, hyper-focused on the partner. I reached out around the birthday, said I had made his favorite cookies. I'm a baker. He was excited, said he wasn't going to be able to come on his actual birthday. And I totally understood, but said he would reach out to me later in the week and get the cookies. I said, great. Months went by, didn't hear from him. Slowly but surely started eating the cookies. I put them in the freezer, right? So they lasted. But clearly, due to aspects of desire that we'll delve into, especially more so in our conversation around the sensationalism that has occurred around Laverne Cox. And I think Laverne Cox can be used more so to talk about structural issues and less so to be focused on her as a person and dealing with that, but focusing on the structural issues that sometimes inform our interpersonal relationships, be it romantic in Laverne's case or platonic in others, who we value, who we give more time to. And it's not necessarily based on what they offer us in terms of that level of friendship, but maybe what they offer regarding desirability in the outside world. But back to the article. As I said, she talks about being incompatible, and I think that's a really important thing to think about, especially as adults. Sometimes our interests change. Sometimes our political leanings shift, and maybe we're just not as compatible with these people anymore, and that's okay. I know some friends, they still use Facebook, and they see people from high school that they used to be really great friends with and see some of the things that they post and talk about that don't mesh with who they are now. And so clearly these are people before social media, as I oftentimes discuss in my courses, that you would just lose by the wayside. If you moved to a different city or a different state, these are people that would just naturally fall off. I think about my parents' generation. If they didn't send a postcard to the people with their new address and phone number or way to contact them, you kind of just lost track of those neighbors or those former classmates. And maybe you see them if you go to a random reunion and you kind of schmooze and say, oh yeah, we should get together. And we know 9 times out of 10 that never happens. And then you wait till the next time. But incompatibility is really important. We also know that being an absent friend can also be due to issues that might relate to low self-esteem, hyper-independence, or an avoidant attachment style, as the author mentions. And so you may be underestimating just how much you matter to people, or you may not think that you're likable. So maybe you just don't push to be a part of these things with individuals, or you don't reach out, or you think you're too important or too busy, or your presence is charity, right? As Jay-Z has famously said over a decade ago, that they should be blessed just to be in your presence. So I can't make it this time, but I'll make a drive-by or do an appearance. They'll appreciate it and keep it moving. Well, the world doesn't revolve around you. And I think a lot of times we've become selfish in how we approach friendships. As we've discussed before, friendships are usually the first interpersonal relationship that hits the skids when life gets tough, because there is no institution and there are no formal rules and boundaries that surround friendship. What makes friendship so unique and fascinating and interesting to study and to think about and theorize, from my perspective, is simply that friendship can be done any host of ways, any multitude of ways, whatever works best for you and the person in that friendship. And I think that gets lost in a lot of discussions on friendship that try and create these rigid rules where, yes, there are rules, but those rules need to be agreed upon between both parties, and those rules can be anything. So I know from all of my close friends, as we've discussed on this podcast, there's a variety of modes that we communicate, frequencies in which we communicate, frequencies in which we see each other, frequencies of topics we discuss, frequencies of interpersonal drama or dilemma. Some people I go to first when I'm having issues, or they come to me first before they come to other people, and vice versa. And that doesn't mean that one relationship is better or stronger or more meaningful than the others, but it just means that we are operating these friendships differently. But it is, of course, important to have boundaries. And me and the author, I think, agree there. The last point that she makes in her article is essentially boundaries are important. If you feel, she says, that you're entitled to cancel whenever you want and that you still deserve future invitations, that's not a boundary. That's a selfish desire for permission to act on your whims, regardless of how your behavior affects others. And so I think it's important to have conversations with close friends, those friendship check-ins, as I referenced before, to see how you've been measuring up. I've shared that before, that Dr. Anderson, Janine, and I do this frequently, where we check in for about every 6 months to a year and just test the life blood of our friendship. Even though we see each other now about twice a year, we still check in and just say, hey, am I showing up for you? Am I doing these things? The last time I actually saw her, we had a really great discussion around faith and religion that we had never talked about. And we have been friends for well over a decade now. But there are always new folds and avenues of exploration in a deep friendship, and we should never be afraid or scared to talk to our friends about this, as well as maybe our disappointments. So sometimes maybe a friend isn't showing up for you in the way that you fully desire for them to show up. And that probably is going to be important for you to have that conversation so resentment doesn't build. Perfect example. So for the newer friend I was trying to foster a relationship with that only didn't work out, I did raise the concern and issue. I said, hey, I'm always inviting you to things and you're always a maybe, or you say you're going to come and then you turn it down last minute. I don't really appreciate that. And we had a discussion and he said he was going to work on it and then ultimately didn't. And that's okay. And we moved on. No ill will. I think we still follow each other on social media and might comment from time to time, but we aren't friends. I wouldn't claim him as a friend. I would doubt he would claim me as a friend, but there's no love lost there either. And I think we should take these opportunities when people are falling short to have that conversation. And you might also realize in those conversations that maybe you're just incompatible when it comes to friendships. So I know some people, they're looking for the Instagram friendships. They want to have cute pictures with people that they can post. And they're not looking for really meaningful, deep connections. And that's fine. Some other people might be looking for more deep, meaningful connections, and that doesn't matter to them. So you might just not be oriented in the same way. Or I know, for instance, some of my friends, they really like to go to the club or do those things, and that's not my MO. So they don't invite me to those things, and I also don't take it as an offense because they know that I'm not interested in doing those things. So another thing, when it comes to invitations, especially with friends, we also have to think, is this kind of a false invitation? Or I'm inviting this person to do something that maybe he, she, or they are actually really not interested in doing. So of course they're going to say no to it. And then if you keep giving them false invitations and they keep saying no, is it really fair to hold that against them? No. But I also think it's important for someone in there to have a conversation, whether it's the friend that's always turning it down because it's not something they're interested in, to say, hey, you invite me to all these things and I appreciate you think about me, but I'm not interested in these types of things. These are the things I like to do. Are any of those of interest to you? And let's figure out where we can find alignment. Or the person who's always inviting, getting the turn down, saying, hey, you're always turning me down. Why is that? So sometimes people talk about how they're talking at each other. I recently had a pretty long conversation with a friend about that, where he was feeling frustrated about talking at someone that he was trying to get to know in a romantic sense. And I kind of broke it down for him, where oftentimes when we come to any interpersonal relationship, we seem to believe that we have similar understandings, ideas, or concepts as that person. And so when we say things like accountability, or we say things like texting frequency or communicating often, consistency. Well, what do these things mean? You have to break those down into specific examples for people so that they can better understand what you are saying. So I riffed somewhat on her article, more so related it to larger issues. I think the article title was more sensational than what the article actually offered. The nuts and bolts, just to review the article, were saying how clearly a lot of people desire a community and a network, but they're not necessarily willing or able to invest or create that network. So, perfect example, I have a network of friends here in Philadelphia. I've shared before. I create a text thread, and oftentimes we'll throw ideas of things that we're interested in doing or that we are going to do. And some people might migrate off that thread and decide to do those things, or we might hash them out in that thread and figure out what to do. So, I know, for instance, one of the people on the thread hosted a fun game night that kind of spurred from that thread. I've invited people to several movies that spurred from that thread. The most recent event we did was kind of like a taco Saturday event where I made some chicken and my, newer friend Humphrey, he made some delicious pork shoulder, right? We all tore up the food, had a good time, and it just came together naturally. And there was clearly a level of investment from everyone involved. So our friend Eddie, for instance, showed up and wasn't going to bring anything cooked or prepared, but called me before and said, hey, do you want me to bring anything? Which I appreciate, right? You're thinking, hey, I want to be invested. I know I'm not cooking something. I'm not providing the space, but how can I show up? And I said, hey, there's a liquor store around by us. Could you pick something up? He picked something up, brought it. Perfect. Cool. Easy. But we have to think, how are we building that community? So even if you're not the person that hosts, right? I'm the one that usually hosts in my friend group, right? Or now Humphrey, love and appreciate that, right? I'm not the only host, but we kind of both host. But if we're both always hosting, always kind of cooking, always cleaning, how can you show up? Is it maybe you help clean? Do you bring a dish? Do you bring a cocktail? Do you bring a dessert? Do you just drop some money on the table? Shit, who knows? Bring a game, right? How are you also getting your hands just a little dirty? And I think when we think about that in terms of having a tribe, that's how we build these closer bonds. So clearly there's that level of investment, showing up, putting in some money, putting in some sweat equity. There's that emotional closeness that's going to come from having those game nights or Taco Tuesdays or going to movies. Now you're going to have maybe a discussion afterwards. So there's that shared activity, but then of course through dialogue. And then through these things, that's how you build trust. When you say you're going to show up to something, you're showing up. I tell you things in confidence, or I share some grief I have and we talk about that. And support. You're showing up. You're supporting me. With that said, though, I think it's important to transition briefly into discussing roadblocks specifically towards male friendship. So I think a lot more is being made of this male loneliness epidemic. We've talked about it on this podcast, and I'm sure we'll reference it again, as this is an interpersonal communication podcast. But a lot of people are talking about feeling lonely, feeling isolated, and especially a lot of men more so are coming more and more towards the forefront and discussing their desires for community. And we see groups popping up. So I have a friend who lives in a different city, and there literally is a Black men's collective, and they kind of organize activities and events for Black men specifically to do together to help foster, right, through that shared activity, hopefully some emotional closeness, hopefully some investment, some trust and support will be built out of that. So there are things that are coming online, or famously running clubs kind of blew up the last year and a half or so, where people kind of join running clubs and are trying to get physically fit while also making friends. But when it comes to men and friendship, of course, people throw out the word toxic masculinity. And that is something definitely that we have discussed, right? Which is due to the patriarchal powers that tell men what they're allowed to share, what is deemed as being a man and what is not. So we know boys don't cry. We know that you're manly if you hold in your emotions, be strong. But these things are, if you're withholding your emotions, not just from yourself, because you've been taught that it's not great to be emotional, you can't cry, you can't do X, Y, and Z, but then you're also holding that away from others. So you're sitting in loneliness, essentially. Even if you're surrounded by people, you're not really discussing how you genuinely feel. Or men are oftentimes taught that it's their partner that becomes their therapist or their outlet to discuss these feelings, but not with anybody else. So then the desire is to find a partner so that then you can let down your guard a bit with that partner, but only that partner. And that is such a sexist norm that unfortunately men have been taught and have bought into, that they're not able or allowed to be viewed as men, right? This masculinity, this toxic masculinity, I would say, that you aren't allowed to feel this way. So we know that patriarchal cultures, males, right, simply aren't allowed to be who they are, as Bell Hooks talks about in The Will to Change, and how their identities are always tied up in what their value is. So Hooks makes a statement in The Will to Change that in an anti-patriarchal culture, males do not have to prove their value and worth. They know from birth that simply being gives them value. The right to be cherished and loved. And I'll repeat that last sentence because I think it's really important. They know from birth that simply being gives them value gives them value. The right to be cherished and loved. I'll say it a third time because I messed up clearly, right? So they know from birth that simply being gives them value. The right to be cherished and loved. And so I think what is so interesting about today's culture is we clearly know that men and boys, that they have to save themselves, essentially, right? Women can't do this work. Non-binary people can't do this work. Genderless people cannot do this work. The men who have bought into this idea of masculinity, of manhood, have to shift the paradigm that is controlling and constricting their ability to show up as their fully formed, sincere selves. Why can't you cry at a sad movie? Why can't you share with a close male friend insecurities that you have? Why can't you foster new friendships with people around interests of music, of movies, of anime, of books? Why does it have to be sports? Or if it is sports, can that branch out in talking about your feelings outside of sports? How you feel? Why is it usually for most adult men that their lives revolve around their livelihood, what they can provide, and not just about who they are, what they like? And I referenced this on social media. I shared a passage from the book, and I said, and this is why it's been difficult for a lot of people to date me, because I'm not interested in what you can provide, right? I can provide for myself. My parents taught me how to do a lot, right? I can cook, I can clean, I can change a tire, I can do some light electrical work, right? Shout out to my father being an electrical engineer. I can paint, I can fix certain things, I can do some tech stuff, right? My parents taught me to be a whole formed individual, and I'm fortunate enough to have economic resources where if there's something I can't do, I can hire someone. Where a lot of men are taught in order to be in romantic relationships, I have to provide you with something. And I'm not looking for that. I'm not looking for you to pay a bill. I'm not looking for you to fix something. I'm not looking for you to cook something. I'm not looking for you to buy me something. I can do all that on my own. I'm looking to have a good time with you. I'm looking to laugh with you. I'm looking to cry with you. I'm looking to enjoy these things. And that is more demanding on a lot of men because that's not what they have been conditioned to in this patriarchal society. They've been conditioned that their worth only comes from what they can provide. And so when they come at me looking to provide something, I say, I'm not impressed by that. I remember specifically someone was trying to impress me by the fact they had a platinum Amex. And I said, okay, I've been a platinum Amex member since 2006. And they're like, exactly. Those things don't impress me. What does Shania Twain say? That don't impress me much. And so I think clearly this toxic masculinity is a roadblock, but we also have to talk about that or revisit that concept of social snacking. And I think unfortunately that this is what a lot of male friendships revolve around is social snacking. And so just to remind people, social snacking is a term for brief positive interactions that can help people feel connected and happy. It can also help people build a sense of identity and community. So some aspects of social snacking are waving at someone, saying hello, making eye contact, having a brief conversation with someone, maybe a quick video call to a loved one, on social media, it's usually liking a picture, writing a message to a friend, maybe, I don't know, sending a DM or a quick video call. But there's not this deep level of investment with any of these things that I've highlighted. And a lot of times with men and their friendships, they'll get around and they'll play video games, but they're talking about the game, not about who they are. They'll hang out and watch a sporting event at a bar or go to a sporting event, and they're talking about what they're watching, right? This is kind of social snacking in my sense. You're doing a shared activity, but you're not sharing any interpersonal information about yourself. And this has become more and more common, or the rise in streaming. You're literally watching someone else play a video game, or they're talking about their life a bit while they're playing this game. And you might feel a little connected, so you're sharing things in the chat of their live, but oftentimes that person's not your friend. They don't really know who you are. You're just a name on the screen that's saying a comment that they might read, and that's it. But you feel a little connected to them because of this parasocial relationship that you're building with them through watching their live. And so I think, unfortunately, for a lot of men, especially men who become more and more chronically online, a lot of their friendships are these parasocial relationships with individuals. And their relationships are also informed by desire. And so we know desire is taught to us. We're indoctrinated into it. It's structural. It determines what we view as valuable. It determines who we think is valuable and worthy of our time. It teaches us who and how we should go about engaging with people. So clearly, if you find someone attractive in a romantic sense, you desire them, you're going to put in a lot of work to get to know them, plan dates, do all of that. But on the flip side, if you find someone desirable in a platonic sense, you hopefully are going to put in more work. But when it comes to desire, I think we need to bring in the term insufficient white or whiteness that we've talked about in an earlier episode, and essentially that those who exist outside of this white binary, and we add in Winterhand's exploration of men as well, gay men in particular, men of color, right? The insufficient whiteness goes to age, body type, way of dress, social class. All of these determine who is, quote unquote, deemed valuable and desirable and who isn't. And so we know, moving somewhat into Laverne Cox, right, when she came out and said, he was blonde hair, blue-eyed, muscle-bodied, NYPD, MAGA police officer, 22 years her junior. Well, that was sufficiently white, right? That was who she was taught in this structural system of desire, the libidinal economy, as some people discuss. And that's a term that deserves probably a whole episode in and of itself, so I'm not really going to engage with it. But it's important for us to understand that we are constantly given messages in media, in education, in history books of who is desirable, who is the pinnacle of beauty. We even see it with the Sydney Sweeney campaign, where she's blonde-haired, she's blue-eyed, she's lightly tanned, and she has, quote-unquote, good genes. And there's a backlash and a pushback to it, which kind of relates to where we are as a society and this friction we're having due to the fascism that is being blatantly seen and discussed and being open, right? A lot of the backlash that we're seeing in pop culture, a lot of the shifts that we're seeing in pop culture is due to this backlash, right? The quote unquote DEI, all of this, the pushbacks are all due to the insufficient whiteness that we represent as people who are not white, who aren't able-bodied, maybe aren't a particular age, don't have social class status, right? Our clothes, our money, the way we dress, our body type, all of these things, right? We are seen as insufficiently white. And now, because of who is in power in America, there's been this pushback. And so we're refocusing on what was desire ultimately? I think in the past decade or so, we've been broadening our understandings of desire. Maybe I'm being generous. I'd say maybe the last 4 or 5 years, maybe we've been broadening, right? We've been seeing, especially in ad campaigns, we're seeing people of different body shapes more and more, right? People are able to make a living as models who aren't just thin, especially with women, right? With curvy, we're seeing curvier women, quote unquote, right? But even still within that desirability, there's certain body type that these women still have to have oftentimes. But we were seeing a broadening of our understandings of what desire is. So I think we're now in this moment in 2025 where society and culture is shifting back to these old understandings of desire. And that's where we're having this issue. And that's, a lot of people had messaged me, sent me some emails, even asking Ask Dr. Shepard on my opinion about Laverne Cox. And to me, I do have an opinion, but I don't think it's important. What I do think is important is, what does it say that she offers this information, and what does it say about the moment in which we exist and who we place value in, especially in interpersonal relationships. And that's influenced by desire, right? Who we are taught is desirable due to maybe insufficient whiteness, or who is sufficiently white, or who fits that standard closely or more closely. I remember having kind of a discussion with a friend around that, where clearly I'm insufficiently white, right? In multiple aspects: body type, age, skin color, features, all of this, and how that's impacted my dating life, but also sometimes impacted my interpersonal, familial, as well as platonic relationships, where I am labeled or treated a certain way, maybe potentially due to how I am viewed in the desirability, the libidinal economy, where I am placed at a lesser value than somebody else. So maybe someone who's just getting to know me isn't that willing to put in that effort. Perfect example to maybe underscore this point: I was fostering a new friendship with someone who had moved here to Philadelphia. We had made tentative plans to get Thai food. Didn't really work out, but a person's new here, not going to press. Ultimately, don't hear from the person. Cool, it's fine. Someone moves here, maybe our paths will cross again. Our paths did cross again, and they crossed due to a mutual friend of ours. We were supporting that friend in a virtual setting. So the person texted me, said, "Oh my God, are you on this live?" And I was like, "Yeah, I am. I'm here supporting my friend." They're like, "Oh, you know that person too?" I said, "Yeah, we've been pretty good friends since he moved here a few years ago." Then the person's trying to strike up a conversation, and I say plainly, I said, "Hey, we had made some plans. I hadn't heard from you in a few weeks. If you didn't see me on this live, would you have reached out to me?" I said, "Just be honest." The person said, "To be honest with you, probably not." And I said, "Great. So leave me where you left me. It's no harm, no foul." But clearly, for whatever reason, and I would argue some of it is due to desirability politics, right? My friend and I don't look alike. My friend is more closer to sufficient whiteness than I am due to body type and other things. That you weren't interested in putting in that time to really invest in having a relationship with me because I'm not deemed as desirable, whatever that looks like. But you were interested in building a relationship with my friend who is viewed closer to being desirable. And now, because I'm good friends with this person, now their desirability is being reflected onto me a bit. And now you are interested in fostering a relationship with me. And so that's where I think, for me, the conversation with Laverne Cox and this revelation that people are having is more important to discuss in that way than what a celebrity is choosing to do with their personal life, right? Well, I think the personal is political, and Laverne has shared that she believes that too, and is very well read on a lot of these matters. Sometimes we come up short, but I do believe personally that ultimately our true selves, we can know the politic, show up in our desires. And have we worked through Why is it that I desire this person? Why is it that I have this preference? Why am I unwilling to give this other person a chance who's interested in me, but I don't find them desirable? What is it about them that I don't find desirable? I think those are internal conversations all of us have to have. And of course, this, and with Laverne, is in a romantic sense, but even in a platonic sense. What I've always found interesting when certain friends will bring newer friends that they've had around, and oftentimes those friends don't last, is because I always say, I can tell what type of person this is based on how they treat me when we're in mixed company with you, right? They treat me like dust, means they don't see value in me. And why don't they see value in me at all, right? I've opened up my home, they're here enjoying my food, but they're being rude to me. They're not really engaging with me. I ask them questions, I'm being friendly, and they're giving me one-word answers. And it's okay, they might not want to be my friend, but why? In first initial meeting, are you so turned off by me? You don't even know who I am. So I think these are important things to discuss and think about when it comes to platonic relationships, because there is a desire there platonically, where clearly, especially in a lot of, I would say, gay male friendships, a lot of people highlight how usually it's like the Instagram friendships. They all look similar, or they all have similar body types. You don't see a lot of variation there. And I think that happens sometimes in heterosexual women friendships. Sometimes you see, these photos and it's not really a variation, right? They look very similar. So how is desire not just informing our interpersonal romantic choices, but I think it's important to think about how desire is informing our interpersonal platonic choices as well. And so that might also be making you a bad friend, because if we have the same interests, we have the similar viewpoints, and you're lonely or you're looking for friends, why is this person not a friendship option? And I also, as I always say, friendship is not a consolation prize, right? We shouldn't, okay, I'm not interested in you romantically, so let's be friends. Whoa. Is there actually some common ground to have that friendship or not? And one of the conversations I had earlier this week, while we're not having Ask Dr. Shepard, is the potential romantic partner kept offering that to my friend as an out, like, oh, okay, well, maybe this isn't going to work out, so let's just be friends. I'm like, well, were you actually looking to be this person's friend, or are you just or is this person potentially just using this as a soft landing, and then you're never going to talk to each other again? Because we also we don't treat friendships as the rich, vital relationships oftentimes that they are. And I think that is why a lot of people are more lonely, and maybe some of you are bad friends because you're not really pouring into those cups of those people, or you're not creating these strong rules and boundaries with your friends and creating a community. Is this someone you're actually in community with, or is this just someone you hang out with from time to time? And for me, especially as I grow older, I'm not necessarily interested in the going out friends. And there's nothing wrong with having those people. I know for me specifically, I'm more interested in having friends I can talk about life with, who I can theorize issues I'm having in my personal life, who I can talk about my fears with, who we can talk about the state of the world and talk about more meaningful, deep conversations than let's go get a drink, or let's go eat here, or let's watch this movie, or let's listen to this, go to this concert. Those are fun things, and I like to pepper those in, of course. I don't want to talk about, how horrible the world is every single day, or my interpersonal life all the time. No, I think those are also going to be very important things to have, but I'm not interested in just having friends if that's all we do. And doesn't mean that the person is a bad friend. I think it goes back to that friendship compatibility. It just might mean that we're not looking for the same things out of a friendship, and that's okay. But I think we need to not be afraid to have these conversations regarding what you're looking for when it comes to a platonic friendship. I think especially with men, as we discussed, right, this toxic masculinity that exists in this patriarchal culture, that these men need to work for themselves to become anti-patriarchal and to redefine masculinity to include aspects of being in tune with your emotions and being able to hug your friend or be there in an intimate way with your friend, but not feel that that makes you less of a man, or saying no homo after that people used to say back in the day, right? I don't know what they say now, sus or whatever, right? We need to remove these things. There should be no issue with doing any of these close interpersonal things. I think men have to work on that. And then, of course, bring up Laverne a little bit. We also have to think about how desire is teaching us who is valuable and who is not valuable, and not just in a romantic sense, but in a platonic and any interpersonal sense, be it even family members. Sometimes, I haven't necessarily talked about family all that much on this podcast, but we will, of course, get into it because it is an interpersonal relationship. But sometimes who we find to be more desirable is who we tend to be around more, or who we tend to work with more. Or if we have conflict, maybe we're more interested in working through that conflict with this person because there's a desirability aspect of them that you don't want to deny. So I think that hopefully wraps this episode up in a cuter bow. But before I do that, I wanted to just read this quote from Deshaun Harrison. There was a Olay and Friends that they were on, and they were discussing the Laverne Cox situation. I think that conversation offered some great tidbits, but I think Deshaun's last statement was really the crux and was really important. And they said, paraphrasing but also quoting, that this is about Black folks at large. I think that we have to get to a point where we are willing to choose our morals, our ethics, our values, our politics over any relationship. I think that is the point that I've reached, and that we have to be clear about the fact that in many ways, love, this hope for love, really keeps us beholden to a level of violence and abuse and harm that quells any sort of possibility for liberation. And so I just think that at some point we have to be honest about the fact that we need liberation more than we need to be striving for this sort of fantastical idea of love. And of course, this was somewhat about this idea of love was a romantic love. But I think what Deshaun brilliantly does is posit this just to think about any relationship, as they say in that kind of beginning, that we need to have a willingness to choose our own morals, our own ethics, our own values, our own politics over any relationship, right? That's not just a romantic relationship, but a platonic relationship, a familial relationship. We have to hold these standards. And sometimes if people don't match up with them, we have to figure out an exit ramp or a way that we are going to engage with them if we so choose to. As I've shared before, I think one of the most brilliant things I've gathered from this younger generation is their intolerance to take betrayal of their ethics, their values, and their morals from family members, where I know in my generation we were kind of taught, oh yeah, but it's family, it's blood, you have to work through it. Well, no, if someone totally disrespects you, if someone treats you in such a way that betrays your morals, your ethics, your values, your politics, do they really deserve to be around just because you share blood or you're related to them by marriage? I don't think so. And I really appreciate my students for sharing that with me. So I said we were wrapping up, then I read this brilliant quote by Deshaun, but I think that's something that we should all chew on, is choosing our own morals, our ethics, our values, our politics over any relationship. And what does that look like platonically? What does that look like romantically? And if we are struggling with friendships, we have to have a conversation first with ourselves about what we're looking for regarding a friendship. What type of friendship are you looking for? But also, what are you going to be providing as a friend, and how you can maintain that, as well as how to have check-ins if you're falling short or that friend is falling short. And so that's where I'll wrap us up today. And I hope to hear you or see you on the next one. Bye-bye.